They told me I'd spend another Christmas at the group home, but a mysterious deed led me to a snow-covered farm, and what I found there wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about a life I never knew I had. If you've ever felt like your past was a closed book, you know what it's like to be handed a key. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, because this story is for you. The air in Mr. Henderson's office always smelled the same. Stale coffee, cheap lemon cleaner, and the quiet desperation of paperwork that never ended. It was the smell of my life for the last 6 years. Outside, a weak December sun tried and failed to melt the grime on the windows. It was my 18th birthday. For most kids, that meant parties, car keys, a slice of freedom. For me, it meant a new file was being opened somewhere in the county system, the one labeled transitional housing. I was officially aging out. Another Christmas, another institution, just with a little more autonomy and a lot more loneliness. I sat across from Henderson's beat-up metal desk, my hands tucked under my legs to stop them from shaking. He was a good man, tired but good, and he'd done his best for me. He cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes, which was never a good sign. "Leo," he started, his voice gravelly. "Something's come up. Your situation has changed." I braced myself. Changed was a system word. It could mean anything from a budget cut sending me to a shelter in the next state to a clerical error that meant I had another 6 months of mandatory group therapy. I just nodded, a silent, practiced gesture that said, "Get on with it." But instead of sliding another folder across the desk, he gestured to the woman sitting quietly in the corner. I'd barely noticed her when I came in. She was sharp, dressed in a dark wool coat that probably cost more than everything I owned. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her eyes were surprisingly gentle. "This is Ms. Albright," Henderson said. "She's an attorney." My stomach twisted into a cold knot. Attorney. That word echoed with things I'd spent years trying to forget. Cops, courtrooms, social workers with sad eyes explaining why I couldn't go home. "Am I in some kind of trouble?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The woman, Miss Albright, finally spoke. Her voice was calm, measured, like a quiet river. "No, Leo, you're not in trouble. I'm here on behalf of your grandfather's estate." My grandfather. The name felt like a stone in my throat. Arthur Vance. The man who had raised me, taught me how to read the stars and fix a leaky faucet, and then, one day, had driven me to a county building and left me there without a word. He hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't answered any of my letters for 6 years. As far as I was concerned, he'd died to me that day. "His estate?" I repeated, the word tasting foreign and bitter. "He passed away 3 weeks ago, Leo," Miss Albright said, her gaze unwavering. "I'm sorry. He had a very specific set of instructions that could only be enacted upon your 18th birthday." I felt nothing. A hollow space opened up in my chest where grief was supposed to be, but there was just a cold draft. 3 weeks. He had been gone for 3 weeks, and the world hadn't even paused. I hadn't felt a ripple. "Okay," I said, my voice flat. What did this have to do with me? A $20 savings bond? A box of old photographs? Miss Albright placed a heavy manila envelope on the desk. It landed with a soft, important thud. "Your grandfather, Arthur Vance, left you everything, specifically his property, a farm. 112 acres in a place called Northwood. The deed was transferred into your name this morning. It's yours, Leo, free and clear." Henderson's jaw was slack. I just stared at the envelope, a farm, a home. The words didn't compute. My brain, so accustomed to the geometry of institutions, of shared rooms and scheduled meals and locked doors, couldn't form a picture of what that meant. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, flashed behind my eyes. Me, a little boy, sitting on my grandfather's shoulders, the scent of hay and summer soil all around us. He was laughing, his voice a low rumble against my back. I pushed it away. That man was gone. He'd left me. Why? I asked, the single word cracking with the pressure of 6 years of unanswered questions. Why would he give me a house he kicked me out of? Miss Albright gave me a look of deep professional empathy. He left a box for you. It's with your belongings. He said it would explain everything. His instructions were very clear. I was to bring you the deed, a cashier's check for $5,000 for immediate expenses, and this. She slid a small, tarnished brass key across the desk. It was heavy, old-fashioned, the key to the front door. I recognized the intricate scrollwork on its head instantly. I used to trace it with my finger when I was bored. I stared at the key, a tiny piece of a life I thought had been permanently erased. Henderson finally found his voice. So, he doesn't have to go to the transitional facility? Miss Albright shook her head. No. As of this morning, Leo is a legal adult and a property owner. He can go wherever he chooses. The farm is about a 4-hour bus ride from here. I've already purchased a ticket for him. The bus leaves in 2 hours. 2 hours. My entire life. The one I had been steeling myself for, a life of temporary jobs and lonely apartments, had just been obliterated. In its place was a ghost, a snow-covered farm in a town I barely remembered, waiting for me at the end of a bus ride. I didn't feel grateful. I didn't feel happy. I felt like I was being handed a map to a place I wasn't sure I wanted to find. I reached out and my fingers closed around the cold metal of the key. It felt less like a gift and more like a summons, a command from a dead man I no longer knew. The bus ride was a blur of gray slush and skeletal trees against a white sky. I sat with my face pressed to the cold glass, the worn backpack containing all my worldly possessions on the seat beside me. Inside it was the manila envelope with the deed, the cashier's check that felt like monopoly money, and the cardboard box from my grandfather. It was a simple, sturdy box sealed with yellowed tape. I hadn't opened it. I was afraid of what was inside. Afraid of explanations that would be too little, too late. Afraid of the silence I'd find if it was empty. The bus wheezed and groaned its way north, stopping in towns that were little more than a gas station and a diner. With each mile, the city's dirty snow gave way to a cleaner, deeper white. The world outside the window grew quieter, emptier. It was a landscape that matched the one inside me. The last passenger besides me got off in a town called Miller's Creek, leaving me alone with the drone of the engine and my own racing thoughts. What was I doing? Walking into a life that had thrown me away? The social workers always talked about reunification as the ultimate goal, but they never talked about what happens when the person you're supposed to reunite with is a ghost, and the home you're supposed to return to is a place of pain. The bus driver, a heavy-set man with a kind face, called out, "Northwood, last stop." I grabbed my backpack and walked to the front, my boots clumsy on the steps. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You sure this is where you want to be, kid? Ain't much out here." "I'm sure," I lied. He shrugged and pulled the lever to open the door. A blast of frigid air hit me, sharp and clean. It smelled of pine and snow and wood smoke. It smelled like my childhood. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the falling snow, leaving me standing alone in the twilight. I was at a crossroads. There was a small general store with warm light glowing in its windows, a post office, and a single blinking traffic light. According to the hand-drawn map Miss Albright had given me, the farm was another 2 miles down a county road. 2 miles on foot, in the snow, in the dark. Part of me wanted to turn around, to use the check to buy a ticket to anywhere else. A place with no memories, no ghosts. But the weight of the key in my pocket was a physical pull. It was the only thing that felt real. So I pulled up the collar of my thin jacket, adjusted the strap of my backpack, and started walking. The snow crunched under my boots, the only sound in the vast, muffled silence. The flakes were thick and wet, clinging to my eyelashes. Streetlights gave way to darkness, broken only by the occasional porch light of a distant house. My legs ached, and the cold was seeping into my bones, but I kept going, one foot in front of the other. I was walking toward a memory, toward the biggest question of my life. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A rusted mailbox half buried in a snowdrift, the name Vance barely legible. A long, unplowed driveway disappeared into a stand of tall pines. This was it. I took a deep breath, the icy air burning my lungs, and turned down the drive. The trees opened up into a clearing, and there it was. The house. It was a simple, 2-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling, its windows dark and vacant. A wide porch sagged slightly on one end, and the roof was blanketed in a heavy layer of snow. To the left stood a large red barn, its doors shut tight against the weather. It looked smaller than I remembered, sadder. It looked like it had been waiting for someone who had never planned on coming back. I walked up the porch steps, my boots thudding on the old wood. The silence was absolute. I stood before the front door, the key in my hand. It was trembling. This was the door he had closed behind me 6 years ago. Now I was back, and he was gone. I put the key in the lock. It resisted for a moment, stiff from the cold and disuse, but then it turned with a loud, grating click that echoed in the silent air. The sound of a past being unlocked. I pushed the door open and was met with a wall of cold, stale air. It smelled of dust, mice, and something else. The faint, lingering scent of my grandfather. Pipe tobacco and old books. I stepped across the threshold, out of the falling snow and into the darkness of my own history. The house was a tomb of forgotten time. Moonlight filtered through the grimy windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the frigid air. Every surface was coated in a pale gray film. Furniture stood shrouded in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the gloom. I flicked a light switch by the door. Nothing. The power was off. Of course it was. I pulled a small flashlight from my backpack, its weak beam cutting a shaky path through the darkness. I was in the living room. There was the stone fireplace where my grandfather used to tell me stories, its hearth cold and black. There was the armchair where he'd read his newspapers, the impression of his body still faintly visible in the sagging cushion beneath the sheet. It was all exactly as I remembered, yet completely alien. It was a museum of a life that had gone on without me. I walked through the downstairs rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The kitchen was a time capsule. A calendar on the wall was still turned to a month from 6 years ago. A single coffee mug sat in the drying rack by the sink. It felt like he'd just stepped out for a moment, not for good. The cold was relentless, seeping through the floorboards, through the soles of my shoes. I was shivering, not just from the temperature, but from the profound, crushing loneliness of the place. This wasn't a home. It was a monument to my abandonment. Anger, hot and sharp, finally pierced through my numbness. How could he do this? Leave me, this empty shell, this cold box of memories, as some kind of apology? It was an insult. I went back to the front hall and grabbed the cardboard box from my backpack. I set it on the floor, my hands tearing at the tape with a sudden, desperate fury. I needed answers. Now, the tape gave way, and I pulled open the flaps. Inside, nestled in yellowed newspaper, was another smaller wooden box. It was intricately carved, and on the lid was a single sealed envelope with my name, Leo, written in my grandfather's familiar, spidery handwriting. Beneath it were practical things: a bundle of wool socks, thick gloves, a headlamp, several boxes of matches, and a stack of canned goods. And at the very bottom, another envelope, this one thick and bulging. I picked up the letter with my name on it. My fingers were stiff with cold. For a moment I just held it, the paper cool against my skin. This was it. 6 years of silence contained in a single envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was terrified of what it would say, and even more terrified of what it wouldn't. With a deep, shaky breath, I broke the seal. The letter inside was written on a single sheet of yellow legal paper. The handwriting was weaker than I remembered, a little shaky, but it was his. I angled my flashlight onto the page and began to read. "My dear Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I hope you grew up strong. I hope you grew up good. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I don't. I only ask for a moment of your time to let an old man explain." My eyes burned, but I refused to cry. Not yet. The day I took you away was the hardest day of my life. I have replayed it in my mind 1,000 times, the silence in the car, the look on your face when you realized I wasn't coming in with you. It has haunted me every night since. I need you to know. I didn't send you away because I didn't love you. I sent you away because I did. The words hung in the cold air, a direct contradiction to the reality I had lived. I read on, my grip on the paper tightening. I was sick, son. Something was starting to go wrong in my head. The doctors gave it a long, fancy name, but what it meant was that my mind was starting to drift. Forgetting names, getting lost on roads I'd known my whole life. It was only going to get worse. I saw what was coming. A time when I wouldn't be able to take care of you, when I might even become a danger to you. I couldn't let you see me like that. I couldn't let your last memories of your grandfather be of a confused, angry old man who didn't know his own grandson's name. I wanted you to remember me as I was, sitting on the porch, telling you stories about the constellations. The state could give you a roof over your head, 3 meals a day. It was a poor substitute for love, I know, but it was safe. Safer than I was going to be. I had to stop. I leaned my head against the wall, the cold plaster a shock against my skin. I closed my eyes, and the image of him that day came rushing back. Not angry, as I'd always remembered him, but terrified. His knuckles had been white on the steering wheel. His face was a mask of grief. I had been too young, too hurt to see it for what it was. It wasn't abandonment. It was a sacrifice. He hadn't pushed me away. He had been trying to save me from what was coming. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, the letter clutched in my hand. The cold of the house seemed less important now, replaced by a different kind of chill. The chilling realization that the story I had told myself for 6 years, the story that had defined me, was a lie. He hadn't stopped loving me. He had never stopped. The letter continued. "This house is yours now. The land is yours. But I'm afraid I've left you with more than just a home. I've left you with a fight. There's a company, Pioneer Holdings, that wants this land. They've been circling for years, like vultures. They know there's value here that goes beyond farming. I've held them off, but they are persistent. They will come for you now. They will offer you money, more money than you've ever dreamed of. Enough to wash your hands of this place and start over anywhere you want. And maybe that's the right choice for you, Leo. Maybe walking away is the freedom you deserve. A choice. He was giving me a choice. Sell and be free, or stay and fight. Why? Why would he leave me a fight? But if you choose to stay, the letter went on, if you feel any connection to this place, to the memory of your grandmother and me, then you need to know what you're fighting for. There's more to this farm than soil and timber. Go to the barn. In the old tack room, behind the loose stone in the back wall, you'll find the rest of the story. The choice is yours, Leo. It always has been. Whatever you decide, know that I loved you. I have always loved you. Your grandfather, Arthur. I sat there in the darkness for a long time, the letter resting in my lap. The anger I'd felt was gone, washed away by a wave of complex, aching grief. I cried then. Not for the boy who was left behind, but for the old man who had to do the leaving. I cried for the years we'd lost, for the silence that had been filled with so much pain on both sides. He hadn't been a monster. He'd been a man trying to protect his grandson in the only way he knew how, by cutting out a piece of his own heart. After a while, the tears stopped. The cold was biting again, a reminder of the practical realities of my situation. I had no power, no heat, and a mystery waiting for me in a dark barn. I put on the thick socks and gloves he'd left me. I strapped the headlamp to my forehead. Its beam was brighter, steadier than my little flashlight. I stood up, my joints cracking in protest. I had an answer to my first question, but it had only opened the door to a dozen more. I had to know what was in the barn. I had to know the rest of the story. I stepped back outside. The snow had eased up, and the moon was brighter now, casting long, distorted shadows across the white landscape. The barn loomed in front of me, a vast, dark shape against the night sky. It looked intimidating, ancient. I crunched through the deep snow, the beam of my headlamp cutting a path ahead of me. The main barn doors were huge, held shut by a thick wooden beam. It took all my strength to lift it out of its brackets. The doors groaned open on rusted hinges, revealing a cavernous, pitch-black space that smelled of hay, dust, and time. I stepped inside, my light sweeping across the interior. It was like stepping into the belly of a whale. Massive wooden beams soared up into the darkness. Empty stalls lined one wall, their doors hanging open. An old tractor sat in the center of the floor, covered in a thick layer of dust and bird droppings. It was a place of work, a place of life that had been still for a very long time. The tack room was a small, windowless chamber off to the side. The door was swollen shut, and I had to put my shoulder into it to force it open. The air inside was even more stale, thick with the smell of old leather and oil. Rotted harnesses and brittle bridles hung from pegs on the walls. In the far corner was a small stone fireplace, its stones dark with soot. I ran my light along the back wall, looking for the loose stone his letter had mentioned. I pushed against each one, my gloved fingers searching for any give. Finally, one near the floor shifted under my touch. My heart quickened. I pried at it with my fingers and the stone came loose, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity behind it. It was a perfect hiding place. Reaching inside, my fingers brushed against a cold metal object. I pulled it out. It was an old army surplus ammunition box, heavy and locked with a small padlock. Taped to the top was a tiny key. It felt like my grandfather had orchestrated this entire night, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for me to follow from beyond the grave. I used the key, and the lock sprang open with a click. I lifted the lid. The box was packed full. On top was a thick stack of letters, tied together with twine. Beneath them were legal documents, property surveys, and geological reports, and under all of that, wrapped in oilcloth, were several thick bundles of cash. I counted one. It was $100 bills, $10,000. There were at least 5 more bundles. I sat back on my heels, stunned. This was more than just expense money. This was a war chest. I picked up the stack of letters. The top one was addressed to me. The handwriting was the same as the first letter, but it looked older, stronger. This was the beginning of the story. I untied the twine and began to read. "Leo," it started, "if you've made it this far, it means you didn't just take the money and run. It means there's a part of you that's still tied to this place. That makes me proud, but it also means I have to burden you with the truth. All of it. The story of this farm doesn't start with me. It starts with your grandmother, Eleanor." He wrote about meeting her, about falling in love with this land because she loved it. She was the one who had believed the farm was special. She had come from a family of miners and geologists, and she had a sense for the earth that he called a kind of magic. She was the one who had always refused to sell, no matter how hard things got. Then the letters shifted. They became a journal, entries dated over the last 6 years, a chronicle of his lonely life after I was gone. He wrote about the progression of his disease, his moments of clarity and his terrifying periods of confusion. He wrote about Pioneer Holdings and their relentless pressure. Their letters, their phone calls, their increasingly aggressive offers. He had enclosed some of their official correspondence. They were a massive energy development corporation. The geological surveys he'd hidden in the box confirmed what his wife had always suspected. There was a significant deposit of rare earth minerals deep beneath the farm's bedrock. It wasn't just farmland, it was a mine waiting to happen. That's what they wanted. Not for a housing development, but to tear it all apart. This is the point where most stories would have a hero rise to the occasion. But I wasn't a hero. I was a scared kid sitting in a freezing barn, holding a dead man's life in my hands. The weight of it all was crushing me. The debt, the predatory corporation, the secret buried under the land I now owned. He had left me a home, but it felt more like a trap. What did he expect me to do? An 18-year-old with no family, no resources, against a multi-million-dollar company? The offer they would make, the one he predicted, started to sound less like a temptation and more like a lifeline, a way out. Have you ever been handed a problem so big it felt like a punishment instead of a gift? That's where I was. Standing in a dead man's barn, with a debt he didn't explain, a corporate enemy I'd never met, and a choice I didn't want. It felt impossibly heavy. If you know that feeling, that sense of being completely and totally overwhelmed by a legacy you never asked for, just stick with me here. Because what I found next changed the choice from a burden to a responsibility. Now, let's get back to that barn. I kept reading, deeper into the stack of letters, deeper into his solitude. He described Christmases alone. Birthdays he marked on the calendar with a simple, sad circle. He wrote about how he followed my progress through a friendly social worker who bent the rules and gave him updates, how he knew I was safe, that I was smart, that I was surviving. He kept every one of the letters I'd sent him, the angry, pleading letters from a 12-year-old boy that he'd never answered. They were bundled separately at the bottom of the box, my own childish handwriting a painful reminder of the hurt I had carried for so long. Then I found the last letter. It was dated just a month before he died. His handwriting was almost illegible, the sentences fragmented. It was clear his mind was failing him badly. "Leo," it said. "They are closing in, Pioneer, they know I'm weak." Their lawyer called. A man named Peterson, smooth voice, a snake. He said they know about the debts, said they could make it all go away. He made threats, said the county would condemn the place, take it for back taxes. He thinks he has me trapped. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just business. They were preying on a sick old man. But Eleanor, I made her a promise. On her deathbed, never sell, not to them. She knew what they were. Strip miners. They don't build, they destroy. She said this land was a sanctuary, for the water, for the trees, for us. A place to be safe. He wrote about my mother. This was the part I had been dreading. The part of my past that was a complete blank. My grandfather had never spoken of her. I have to tell you about your mother, Sarah. It's the last piece. You deserve to know. She wasn't a bad person, Leo. She was just lost. She got mixed up with the wrong people, with drugs. It started after you were born. I tried to help her, paid for rehab, paid off debts. That's where the money went. That's why the farm started to fail. It wasn't the land that failed us, son. It was me trying to save her. She left one day, said she was poison to you, to this place. She made me promise to give you a good life, a safe life. I tried. I really did. It was a confession and an absolution all in one. The debts on the farm weren't from mismanagement or bad luck. They were the cost of his love for his daughter, and by extension, for me. He had impoverished himself to protect his family. Pioneer knows all this, the letter concluded. They have lawyers who dig. They will use it against you. They'll say the farm is a failed enterprise, burdened by debt. They'll paint a picture of an easy way out. Don't listen to them. Your grandmother was right. This land is special. There's an underground spring that feeds half the valley. Their mining would poison it. It would poison everything. The final documents in this box, that's your ammunition. A signed affidavit from a former Pioneer employee. He quit because he couldn't stomach their methods. It details how they've been illegally pressuring landowners all over the state. It's not much, but it's a start. It's a stone for your slingshot. Fight for it, Leo, not for me, not for your grandmother. Fight for yourself. Fight for a place to put down roots. This is your home. Don't let them take it from you. I put the letter down, my hands shaking. Everything had shifted. This was no longer just about a piece of property. It was about legacy, about a promise. It was about justice for a man who had been hounded in his final years. The money they would offer me wouldn't be a fresh start. It would be blood money, a payment for my silence while they destroyed everything my grandparents had protected. The choice wasn't about running away versus staying anymore. It was about what kind of man I was going to be. Was I going to be the abandoned kid who took the easy way out, who let the bullies win, or was I going to be Arthur Vance's grandson? The boy he had believed in enough to trust with this fight. I sat in the cold silence of the barn, the weight of his words settling over me. The path he had laid out was hard. It was uncertain. I could fail. But for the first time in 6 years, I felt a flicker of something I thought was long dead. Purpose. I packed everything back into the ammunition box except for the letters and the affidavit. I took the cash and stuffed it into my backpack. I had resources, I had a weapon, and I had a story to defend. I walked out of the barn and back toward the house. The moon was high now, illuminating the farm in a stark, beautiful light. It didn't look sad anymore. It looked defiant. It looked like it was waiting for me to fight back. The first thing I did was get the power back on. I found the breaker box in the cellar, a dark, musty space that smelled of damp earth. Armed with my headlamp, I flipped the main switch. Upstairs, a single bulb in the kitchen flickered to life, casting a weak yellow glow. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. It was the first step in bringing this house back from the dead. I spent the next few days in a blur of activity. I used some of the cash to buy groceries and supplies from the general store in town. The owner, a woman named Carol with a warm, wrinkled smile, looked at me with open curiosity. "You're Arthur's boy, aren't you?" she'd asked, her voice gentle. I just nodded, not ready to tell my story. "It's good to have a Vance back in that house," she said, and her simple acceptance was a balm on a very old wound. I worked from sunup to sundown. I shoveled paths through the snow. I cleaned the dust and grime of 6 years from every surface of the house. I learned how to light the pilot on the ancient furnace, and the radiators eventually clanked and hissed their way to life, filling the house with a dry, welcome heat. With every chore, with every layer of dust I wiped away, I felt like I was reclaiming not just the house, but a piece of myself. I was no longer a ward of the state, a case file in a cabinet. I was a man taking care of his home. I read and reread my grandfather's letters, committing them to memory. I studied the affidavit. It was a damning account of Pioneer Holdings' tactics: lowball offers, threats of eminent domain, hiring surveyors to trespass and intimidate. It was signed by a man named David Chen. Finding him would be my next step. The phone call came a week before, Christmas. The landline in the house miraculously still worked. The voice on the other end was exactly as my grandfather had described it: smooth, professional, a snake in a suit. "Am I speaking with Mr. Leo Vance?" "This is he," I said, my heart pounding. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the receiver. "Mr. Vance, my name is Mark Peterson. I'm with the legal department at Pioneer Holdings. First, let me offer my sincere condolences on the passing of your grandfather. Arthur was a formidable man." The false sympathy made my stomach turn. We had been in negotiations with him for some time regarding his property. "I'm calling to extend our most recent offer to you as the new owner. We are prepared to offer you $2 million for the farm." I almost dropped the phone. $2 million. The number was so large it was abstract. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card for life. It was a new car, a college education, a life without worrying about money, ever. For a split second, I saw that life flash before my eyes. The easy life, the life my grandfather said I deserved. But then I saw his face, the terror in his eyes that day in the car. I saw the poison seeping into the valley's water. I saw my grandmother's promise. "No," I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I don't think you understand, son," Peterson said, his tone shifting from sympathetic to condescending. "Your grandfather left that place in a state of ruin. It's mortgaged to the hilt. The back taxes alone are staggering. Our offer is more than generous. It's a rescue." "I know what it is," I said, my knuckles white on the phone. "And I know what you are. The answer is no. The farm is not for sale." "You're making a mistake, kid," he said, the smoothness gone, replaced by a hard edge. "You're an 18-year-old boy playing a game you can't win. We will get that land, one way or another. We can either do this the easy way, where you walk away a rich man, or we can do this the hard way, where you walk away with nothing." The threat was clear. They would bury me in legal fees, foreclose on the debts, and take the farm for pennies on the dollar. They would crush me. "I guess we're doing this the hard way," I said, and hung up the phone. My entire body was trembling. I had just declared war on a giant. But as the fear subsided, something else took its place, a profound, grounding calm. I had made my choice. I was staying, I was fighting, I was Arthur Vance's grandson. The next morning, I called Miss Albright. I told her everything. About the letters, the mining, the affidavit, and the phone call from Peterson. She was silent for a long moment when I finished. "Leo," she said finally, her voice full of a new respect. "Your grandfather was a smarter man than anyone knew. This affidavit, this could be everything. But Peterson is right about one thing: you can't fight them alone. She gave me the name of a pro bono environmental law group based in the state capital. They live for fights like this, she said. Tell them your story. Show them the affidavit. They'll know what to do. That afternoon, I drove my grandfather's old, rusty pickup truck, which had, to my amazement, started after a bit of coaxing, into town. I went to the small library and used their computer to find everything I could about David Chen, the man who had signed the affidavit. It turned out he'd started a small environmental consulting firm 2 towns over. He was trying to make amends for his time at Pioneer. I knew he was the key. Convincing him to go public, to testify, would be my only real shot. Christmas Eve arrived, quiet and cold. The world seemed to be holding its breath. I had a meeting scheduled with the environmental lawyers for after the new year. I had an address for David Chen. The battle lines were drawn. That night, I built a fire in the living room fireplace for the first time. The flames crackled and danced, pushing back the shadows and filling the room with a warm, flickering light. I sat in my grandfather's armchair, the one I had been so afraid to touch just days before. The house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a home. It felt like mine. I thought about all the Christmases I'd spent in the group home, surrounded by other lonely kids, all of us pretending to feel a joy that wasn't there. I had always dreamed of a real Christmas, in a real home, with a family. I didn't have a family, not in the traditional sense. But as I sat there, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle inside, I realized I wasn't alone. I had the memory of my grandfather, a man I finally understood. I had the spirit of my grandmother, a woman I'd never met but whose promise I now carried. And I had the farm itself, a living, breathing thing that was depending on me. The fight ahead was going to be long and hard. I knew that. There was a very real chance I could lose everything. Pioneer Holdings had money and power, and I was just a kid with a box of letters. But as the fire warmed my face, I knew I had something they didn't. I had a reason to fight that wasn't about money. It was about home. It was about a promise. It was about making sure that the sacrifices my grandfather made weren't in vain. The next morning, I woke up to a world transformed. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, covering everything in a layer of pristine white. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was Christmas morning. I made myself a cup of coffee and stood on the front porch, watching the light spread across the valley. The air was so cold it felt clean, pure. For the first time, I wasn't looking at this place as a burden or a battlefield. I was just seeing it. The tall pines at the edge of the woods, their branches heavy with snow. The gentle slope of the pasture. The sturdy, silent barn. It was beautiful. It was worth fighting for. That day, I didn't think about lawyers or corporations. I explored the farm. I walked the perimeter of the property, my boots sinking into the deep snow. I followed a frozen creek down to a small waterfall, its surface a cascade of intricate ice sculptures. I found the spot my grandfather had written about, the high ridge where you could see 3 counties on a clear day. I felt a connection to this place, a sense of belonging that I had never felt anywhere else in my life. This land wasn't just dirt and trees. It was my history. It was my future. It was my home. The resolution didn't come in a dramatic courtroom showdown. It came slowly, piece by piece, over the next year. The environmental law group was a godsend. They were a team of young, passionate lawyers who saw my case not just as a legal battle, but as a moral one. The affidavit from David Chen was the lever they used to pry the whole thing open. He was reluctant at first, scared of Pioneer's retribution, But when I sat down with him and told him my grandfather's story, he saw it was his chance to do the right thing. His testimony, combined with the legal pressure from my new lawyers, triggered a state investigation into Pioneer's practices. The bad press was a nightmare for them. Suddenly, they were no longer the powerful corporation. They were the bullies who preyed on a sick old man and his orphaned grandson. They wanted the problem to go away. Their offer changed. It was no longer a threat, it was a negotiation. They still wanted the mineral rights, but their position was compromised. In the end, we reached a settlement. I didn't want their money, not for the whole farm, but I was also a realist. The debts were real and the farm needed work. We structured a deal. I sold them the rights to a small, remote 10-acre parcel at the far edge of the property, the part least likely to impact the water table. The sale came with ironclad environmental protections for the rest of the land, legally binding and monitored by a third-party agency. It was a compromise, but it was a victory. The money from the sale was enough to pay off all the back taxes, clear the mortgage, and set up a trust for the farm's future. I didn't become a millionaire, but I became something better. I became free. I kept the house, I kept the barn, I kept the 100 acres that mattered, I kept my grandfather's promise. Life on the farm is quiet. It's hard work. I'm learning, slowly, how to fix fences, how to read the weather, how to bring the soil back to life. Some days, the loneliness is a physical presence, a weight in the chair across from me at the dinner table. The scars of the last 6 years haven't just vanished. They're a part of me, a part of my story, but they're not the whole story anymore. I'm not just the kid the system forgot. I'm the man who fought for his home. I often think about the two paths that lay before me that first night. The easy path of money and escape, and the hard path of staying and fighting. I know now that home isn't something you're given. It's not just a deed or a set of walls. Home is the place you choose to fight for. It's the place where your own story finally starts to make sense, where the past and the future meet. It's the hard work and the quiet mornings. It's the feeling of your feet on ground that you know, that knows you. This farm is my home. Not because my grandfather left it to me, but because I chose it. I chose to honor his sacrifice. I chose to build a life here on my own terms. My story is about a farm, but it's really about finding that one place, that one purpose, that makes all the fighting worthwhile. And I want to know what this story taught you. What does home mean to you? Have you ever had to fight for the thing that defines you? Share your story in the comments below. This channel is a community for people who understand that the most important things in life are the ones we have to work for. If that sounds like you, subscribe and become a part of it. You're not alone in this. We're all just trying to find our way back home.